Welcome back everybody to this video all about useful language, and we'll be covering specific grammar structures and vocabulary that will help us to write band 7 and higher answers to our task 1 questions. Now, some of the grammatical structures I'll be showing you will be quite basic, so especially if you're near a band 7 already, you will definitely have seen these structures before, but it's important that we're crystal clear on exactly how to use them and to make sure that you are using them correctly. So even if you find this video easy, it's worth reviewing your grammatical structures and also making sure you're using the right vocabulary and using it accurately. So in this video we're going to be covering 6 things. That is why it's going to be quite a long video, but it's a really important part of the course. And the first thing we'll be looking at is getting the basics right. So looking at parts of speech and being identify different parts of the language. Secondly, we'll be looking at useful verb, noun, adjective and adverb lists. When you see these lists, you'll have all the different verb, nouns, adjectives and adverbs that you could ever need to do well in academic task 1 tasks. Thirdly, we'll be looking at specific grammar structures for describing general trends. Then we'll be looking at grammar structures for describing changes over time. Then we'll be looking at fractions and proportions and how we can use those in our writing. Then we'll be looking at grammar structures used for making comparisons. So there's quite a lot to cover, but like I said, it's a critical part of the course, and so make sure you're ready to make notes and pay attention. First of all, let's get the basics right. Now, there is a big mistake that a lot of students make, and that is thinking that showing a range of grammar is more important than accuracy. So they try to use lots of different structures to impress the examiner when they would be better off just using the structures they know that they can write 100% accurately and sticking to those. When you use structures that you're not 100% sure with, then that is when your grammar band score starts to decrease. So try to use only the grammar structures that you know you can use accurately. So instead of trying to show off lots of different grammar structures, ask yourself, what do you have to do to answer the question? Do you have to describe a general trend over time, as in an overview paragraph? Do you have to describe change in detail over time? Or do you need to compare information from different sources? Once you have clearly identified what you are trying to do for the part of the question you're on, you then select the most appropriate grammar structure to use, not the other way round. Some students decide, oh, I want to use this grammar structure, and then they try and use it for a particular part of a question when it is not appropriate to use that structure. So always think about which paragraph you're writing and what structure is the most appropriate to write that part of the answer. You should also check each sentence as you write it and at the end. So you're checking your sentences at least twice during the writing process. It is important to be able to name parts of the language. This means that we are able to analyze our own writing and see what mistakes we're making, and it also allows us to follow structures that other people give us. So I'm going to be giving you some grammar structures later in this video. So I want to make sure that you know what the different parts of the English language are. So we're going to take a look at those now using a poem. Here it is. Every name is called a noun, like field and fountain, street or town. In place of noun, the pronoun stands, as he and she can clap their hands. An adjective describes something, like magic wand or bridal ring. A verb means action, something done. To read, to write, to jump and run. A preposition shows relation, as in the church or at the station. How things are done, the adverbs tell, like quickly, slowly, badly, well. Conjunctions join in many ways, sentence, word, or phrase and phrase. An interjection cries out, hark, I need an exclamation mark. So hopefully it's fairly obvious through that poem, but let's just quickly go over those again. So nouns are the names of people, places of, or things. So the capital of England is London. So England and London are the nouns there. Pronouns can replace the main noun of a sentence to avoid repetition. So the capital of England is London. It is a multicultural city. It stops us having to repeat the noun again and again. Adjectives are describing words. So London is a multicultural city. Verbs are doing words or action words. Its population grows every year. Prepositions provide information about the relationship of things. So London is on the River Thames. Adverbs add more information about how a verb or action is done. So its population grows quickly every year. And conjunctions link together phrases, sentences, or ideas. So London is on the River Thames and very close to the sea. Other conjunctions might be but, for, or, words like that. And an interjection, more commonly known as an exclamation mark, we don't need to use those in the IELTS test, but you can see what they are there. Okay, let's continue and see why and how these are useful. Okay, quick test now. Here is a typical Task 1 sentence. Can you please pause the video and try and identify what types of words each of the words are? So are they nouns, adjectives, verbs, adverb, preposition, or conjunctions? Pause the video, try and identify what each word is. Okay, so hopefully you came up with this answer. China is a noun, large is an adjective, population is a noun, grew is a verb, rapidly adverb, by preposition, all the numbers are nouns, between is a preposition. So that's a whole sentence classified into its different parts. So we're going to have a look at some word lists now before we have a look at some actual grammatical structures. And this first list is useful nouns. These nouns are excellent for use when describing trends over time, as you would do in your overview paragraph. And you need to make sure that you know at least 2 to 3 of the words from each of these categories. So you need to have a really good understanding of what these words are and how they should be used. But like I said, just 2 to 3 of these. Remember, you're only writing 150 words, so 2 or 3 of these will be fine. So there we go. There are the words you need. So the words for going up, they're all there. You can pause and read them for yourself. You might want to make a note of some of them that you need to remember. Okay, let's have a look at the next word list. Here we've got a list of useful adjectives. Again, these are good for describing trends over time, and I've organize them into two lists, one for large changes and one for small changes. Um, so again, pause the video and make a note of a few if you want. If you know them all already, absolutely brilliant. But as I said before, you need to remember 2 to 3 of these from each side, and that will be just great. This list is the list of useful adverbs, and essentially all we need to do is add the ly to the adjective, and there they are. So we'll be looking at how to put these into structures in just a moment, but again, make sure 2 or 3 of these from either side you know really well, and you know exactly what they mean and how to use them. Next, we have a list of useful verbs, and I've categorized them into verbs that basically mean going up, and those that mean going down. The main difference between most of them is that some of them indicate a fast pace of increase, and others a bit of a slower pace of increase. And similarly to going down, they could indicate a fast pace of decrease, like fall or plummet, and some of them indicate a slower decrease, as in deterioration. So make sure you know 2 or 3 of these. You don't need to know all of these. It's far better to know 2 or 3 really well rather than all of them a little bit. Now that we've gone through a list of different adjectives, nouns, verbs, and adverbs, we need to look at the actual grammatical structures that we can put them into. So first we're going to look at grammar structures for describing general trends over time, and these will be for our overview paragraphs. So the first way to describe a general trend over time is this way, and it's there plus verb to be plus adjective plus noun plus in plus a noun phrase. And if that sounds very odd or very complicated, it simply means this: there was a significant increase in the number of cars sold. So that is one grammar structure, and you can simply replace the adjective or noun with different ones from the list to change the meaning to suit what you are trying to describe. So that's one structure we can use. The next structure is this one, and it's noun phrase plus verb plus adverb. And the example here is the number of cars sold rose dramatically. So a noun phrase is the thing we're talking about, which could be more than one word, as in this case. So the number of cars sold rose dramatically. And again, we could use different words from those lists that we looked at. So the number of cars sold decreased dramatically, or the number of cars sold plummeted rapidly. So it's the same structure, but we can just change the verb and the adverb to show variety to the examiners. Here's a little look at those again with an example. So we've got 3 pie charts here. We looked at these in one of the pie chart videos, so you might recognize them. And there's our structure again. So for this one, we could write, there was a significant drop in the percentage of fish imported from Canada. So that's one of our example structures. And the other structure we need to know is this one, noun phrase plus verb plus adverb. And here we could write, the percentage of fish imported from China grew steadily. So there we go. Two nice, simple ways to describe a trend over time. Next, let's take a look at grammatical structures for describing specific changes over time. And this is likely to occur in our details paragraphs. So here it's explained. There plus be plus adjective plus noun plus of plus number plus in plus noun phrase plus in plus period of time. Obviously, some people don't write and think in this way, labeling all the words like this, but it's just to make crystal clear to you how you structure these sentences accurately. For some people, you'll already be able to write sentences like this, but it's worth going over it again just to make sure we're absolutely clear. So an example sentence for this could be, there was a significant increase of 12% in the number of cars sold in the year 2007. So there's our example. And another way to do it could be noun phrase plus verb plus adverb plus preposition plus number. The number of cars sold rose dramatically to 27 million. So that's an alternative way to describe specific changes over time. And obviously you could change any of those verbs, adverbs, to other ones from those lists that I showed you to give the meaning that you want or that suits the question. So here is a paragraph showing those two different structures being used in a details paragraph. Here's the first sentence, and here's the second sentence. Now, notice that we have started the sentence with the starting point. So we've written from a starting point of 24.3 million in 2006. So that is our dependent clause there. So we've written the starting point before the descriptive sentence, and that's really useful because it does two things. Firstly, it's logical to state the starting point first, and secondly, it creates a complex sentence where anytime we've got two or more clauses, we've created a complex sentence. And simply putting the starting point on here has created a complex sentence. And if we do that throughout our answers, it will help us to score higher in grammatical range. We've also, excuse me, we've also added the words after this and before. So they are typical linking words or cohesive devices, and they join the sentences together naturally. So before we just had two sentences. Now we've got two sentences linked together properly, both with extra dependent clauses on them, making them into complex sentences. So that is how using these simple structures can be linked together to form well-developed paragraphs that show a range of grammar. And that's essentially how to do it. Notice though that this particular paragraph is in past simple tense, so the verbs we've got are was, indicating that this was describing a situation from the past. So they would need to change if you were writing about the future, obviously. So that's something to be careful about. If we were to be talking about the future, then we'd simply alter the tense of the sentences, and we could do that like this. Could change it to saying there is predicted to be, and the number of cars sold is expected to rise, and 27 million before there will be a final slight increase. So, although students often worry about how to write in different tenses, it's actually not too difficult when you break down your sentences and realize which bits actually need to be changed. So it's not too big a change here, and all you need to do is learn specific phrases about the future and the past. And we'll look at tenses briefly in a future video. Next, we're going to take a look at a different way to describe specific changes over time, and this time we're going to use language of proportion. So here we've got a typical graph, typical line graph, and with 3 countries labelled there. And our first sentence reads, the over 65 population of the USA is expected to nearly double by 2040. So rather than say increase by 45%, we're saying it's going to nearly double. And if you look at the graph in 2017, the percentage is around 14%, but by 2040 it rises to perhaps 23%. So it's going to nearly double. So that's another useful phrase to use. Another example, the over 65 population of the USA is expected to decrease by nearly half. So if you look at that line that's just appeared there, it's an example of the USA population decreasing by nearly half. You could also say the population of the USA is expected to increase by nearly a half of what it was in 1940. And that's the other line that's just appeared. So using language of proportion is another accurate way to describe changes over time. Let's have a look at a few more. Here we've got 3 more sentences, and the phrases we've used are is expected to more than triple by 2040, is expected to decrease by nearly a quarter, and is expected to increase by nearly a third. So examples of other phrases we could use. Just in case you're unsure, these are the approximations to the percentages that you might see on graphs. So this is the percentage change. So if you've got a 75% change in something, you've got precisely 3/4. If it's 70%, you might say it's increased or decreased by nearly 3/4. So if it's 55%, you might say it's decreased by just over a half. If it's 48%, just under a half or nearly a half. 50%, exactly a half. 31%, just under a third or roughly a third or slightly under a third. 27%, just over a quarter or approximately a quarter. 23%, just under a quarter or about a quarter. Or 2%, a tiny fraction. So those are different phrases that you can use to describe specific changes over time. It's certainly useful to remember a few of those and try to use them in your paragraphs where they seem appropriate. So those were the 3 ways that you can describe specific changes in your details paragraphs. Make sure you have a look at the model answers in the videos and look to see just exactly how these have been used. Now we need to take a look at grammatical structures that are used for making comparisons. So as well as describing changes over time, we sometimes need to make comparisons. So we're going to look at 5 different techniques for doing that here. And the first one is this. More, fewer, or less, plus noun, plus than. So, in 1985 in England, more people were aged over 65 than in Northern Ireland. And in 2035, fewer or less people will be aged over 65 than in Wales. So, you've probably seen these structures before, especially if you're heading for a band 7. These are sort of elementary, pre-intermediate level comparison structures. In fact, all of them are. It's the complexity of the vocabulary that can make these potentially difficult. But that's the first 2 techniques. Another simple way to make comparisons would be by using this structure, which is to use a 1-syllable adjective with er on the end, plus a noun phrase, plus than, and then the thing you're comparing it to. So, in 1985 in England, a higher number of people were aged over 65 than in Northern Ireland. Or, in 1985 in England, fewer people were aged over 65 than in Wales. So again, nothing overly complicated about this. And you could change the adjectives, use the ones from the list that we looked at previously to suit the purpose of your description. This time we've got more or less plus adjective of more than 1 syllable plus than. So in 1985 in England, more elderly people aged over 65 lived there than in Northern Ireland. So the difference there is using a longer adjective, we're going to use more or less. And finally, we're going to use superlatives. So the first example reads, Northern Ireland had the lowest number of people aged over 65 in 1985. So we simply add est to the adjective to make it the superlative. Or we could say, Wales had the most elderly people aged over 65 in 1985 and 2035. So with more than 1 syllable, elderly, 3 syllables, we simply need to add most or least, depending on the situation. So in this video, we've done the following 6 things. We first looked at different parts of speech or different parts of writing, so we could understand the types of words we were using, and we could then follow different grammatical structures and use them for ourselves. We then looked at useful word lists that we could use for describing change over time. We looked at specific grammatical structures for describing general trends, for overview paragraphs. Then we looked at grammatical structures for describing change over time specifically, for details paragraphs. And we also looked at fractions and proportions as an alternative way to describe changes. And finally, we looked at grammatical structures used for making comparisons. So a lot of that may have seemed easy for you. Those grammatical structures were basically all elementary, pre-intermediate level. The trick is to be able to use the different words from the word list and use a variety of those to accurately describe the data that you're looking at. So you can use those easy structures, but make sure you choose the correct words that accurately describe the data that you're looking at. Okay, That's enough for this video. I hope that was helpful. Obviously, go back and review and make notes on any parts of this video that you found tricky.